So we're going to start with my far right, Gene Munster. He also takes first prize today for coming the furthest. Gene came in from Minneapolis.
Thank you, Marty.
Gene Munster, please.
Thank you, everybody. I am one of the founding partners of Loop Ventures, which is a research-driven venture capital firm that focuses on artificial intelligence, robotics, augmented reality, and virtual reality. In my previous job, I was an analyst that covered some of the large-cap tech companies that are also focused on this space.
Thank you. And to his left, Bob Lenahan, AMC Theaters.
Hi, I'm Bob Lenahan, AMC Theaters. I'm the president of U.S. programming, and I'm responsible for maintaining studio relationships and determining what content we play in the AMC Theaters domestically. AMC is the largest exhibitor in the world now. That's pretty much it.
And to his left, Paul DeGarabedian.
You said my name right, I like that.
I've been practicing.
I'm Paul DeGarabedian, Senior Media Analyst for ComScore. I've been analyzing trends in box office for the movie industry for about 25 years now. And at ComScore, we have information on global box office, social media metrics, also audience surveys. So literally everything having to do with media, we track it. But my main focus has been theatrical box office for these many years. So thank you.
And I've been practicing Craig's name, too, to make sure I got it right. I'd ask you when we spoke the best way to pronounce it. Craig Damel. That's right. Thank you. If you would, please, from IMAX.
Sure. Craig Damel from IMAX Entertainment. I run global distribution for IMAX, which basically entails coming up with a slate of Hollywood titles to release on our about 1,200 screens globally. Prior to IMAX, I've spent about 15 years at 20th Century Fox running international distribution.
Okay, Heather Blair.
You said my name right.
Well, that one's easy. Well, thank you.
He messes it up every time. I'm Heather Blair with Mediamation. I am head of cinema sales. Been with them for about 7 years, and I traverse the world looking for new opportunities to bring 4D motion effects theater seats. We also do some VR motion product, and now we're entering into esport tournament play that will be inside our cinema partners and in their lobbies.
Okay, and last but not least, Matthew Bacall.
You got my name right too, so
well, thank
kudos,
you.
all full sweep. I'm the chairman of a company called Atom Tickets. We sell tickets for movie theaters, and we work with a bunch of folks here, including AMC and IMAX, of course, selling tickets to their venues. We are sort of a next-generation social mobile ticketing platform with a bunch of fun features, and our whole goal is getting butts in seats, so making it really easy for people to gather their friends and go to movies.
And my name is Marty Schindler. I got that one pronounced correctly also. We are a husband and wife consulting team. Our combined credentials are a Big Four professional service firm, top 5 business school, hands-on experience at companies such as 20th Century Fox, MGM, Lucasfilms, Industrial Light and Magic, Kodak, Cinesite, and Bank of America. Through the years, we've worked at almost every point on the entertainment industry value chain, on the horizontal chain, as well as the many points on the verticals that intersect with the horizontal. Been at it for a little over 20 years, advising people who are very creative or very technologically focused but need assistance on the business side. All right, we're going to get started, and we're going to discuss a lot of different things here. But first, we're going to leave time for Q&A. Q from you, A from them. And first, though, I want to get a show of hands so we get a sense of who's in the audience. How many people in the audience have been to the cinema in the last month? Okay. How many people have seen a movie in IMAX?
All right.
Okay. How many in 3D, IMAX 3D or other 3D? Okay. Rode on a motion base. Okay. In a theater or at a theme park? How about in a theater? Okay, very good. That's very good. At a theme park?
Well done.
Attended a special event, i.e. an alternative cinema at a theater that was not a current feature film, such as the Met Opera or a classic old movie? I figured you two guys were, yeah. Anybody else? Well, how about a show of hands on the rest of that? That's not bad. Okay. Own a VR or AR or both headsets and don't work in an industry or a company involved in one. Okay. And we're going to get started on some of the questions. At the end, we're going to do something I call blockbuster or not. I'm going to leave time for that. Thinking about some of the forthcoming movies that are coming out. So the topic is transformation. We're going to tracking the numbers is a phase I often use in my tweeting and posting on Facebook about a range of industry stats, all sorts of different things, from TV ratings to box office to other things that I'm keeping track of. The global box office was effectively a break-even in 2016 compared to 2015, in large part to the slowdown in growth in China. It's approximately down 5% year-to-date domestically. I don't have at the tip of my tongue the international numbers. The non-broadcast home entertainment industry is now nearly 40 years old. People get great entertainment experiences at home, and cord cutting is escalating, along with a wide variety of options for accessing content. Lots of ways for people to see lots of stuff. But the theatrical experience is still very special. It's gone through several stages of upgrades in equipment, seating, amenities, and other ways and production techniques that bring stories to life. It's been very transformational over the years. So, as Craig had said, getting butts in seat is a key. And so the question is, are we in a transformational time now? And if so, what are some of the things that are transforming that experience? What are some of the future innovations that people in this room ought to be thinking about? Paul?
Well, I think that we are in a transformational phase right now. I mean, never before have we had so much content available on so many platforms via devices, more devices than ever before. For me, being really focused on the theatrical movie-going experience, I see that singular event nature of going to a movie theater as still relevant, viable, important. It's something that I think drives everything else, but we still have to understand that there are it's a very competitive environment. There's a lot of content where you just sit on your couch or just be literally right in front of your phone and get the world at your fingertips. But to me, there's no world like going into that theater and being immersed in it. But of course, it's content driven, obviously. The movie theaters rely on the great movies to bring people in. It's experiential as well with IMAX and the seats, the 4D experience. So I think it's just about, for each one of these verticals, to be innovative. You can't rest on your laurels anymore. It used to be, post-World War II, there was like 60, 70 million people a week going to the movies, but what were your other options before television? And nighttime sporting events via lighting that came in. So it's definitely a transformational time right now.
Is this the right time for that transformation?
Are you asking me, or?
No, anybody would like to answer?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think, yes, it is transformational, but I would suggest that, having been at this for 40 years, it's always been transformational. It's always been the next thing. There's always been a concern about the industry, the exhibition industry, disappearing because of television, because of video cassettes, because of DVDs, because of whatever. Now, as Paul alludes to, there's so much content available on so many platforms where you can, access content mobily if you want. And as exhibitors, we've had to rise to the challenge of, making sure that we bring people into our theaters by innovating. And Marty has kind of referenced the seating revolution that's taken place, the innovations with IMAX and the great experience that they bring. Dolby Cinema is another one. And looking a little bit ahead, there's been so much discussion about VR in recent years. AMC has just invested in a company called Dreamscape, partnered with Westfield and Steven Spielberg, which is like an interactive VR experience where you go in with your colleagues and can kind of experience this thing together, which is great. And that'll be debuting in Century City in Q1 of 2018. So yes, transformative, and it's going to continue to be transformative. It's just going to keep on keeping on.
Keep on.
We'll bring people back into the cinema, not just the VR, and we're going to get into some VR specific comments in a little while, but what is going to get people back into the cinema?
Maybe before
Gene?
before I got a question for, which was the butts in the seats person?
Matthew?
I think we all qualify.
Yeah, we all want that.
I'm just maybe curious, over the last 10 years with smartphones and social media, how you fought that battle. And I don't know if there's any insights that you've learned. Is it something you can even, is it just great content wins at the end of the day? Because I think that the next wave, there's always waves coming. My take would be always waves coming, but sometimes there's big waves coming. And I think we're in front of a big wave, but you could argue that with DVDs or TV too, the other ones you mentioned. But so I guess my question for anyone else is, I'm just curious, like what has that done to I've heard stories about millennials don't want to go to movies.
Yeah, so I'll take one piece of that question, and to sort of follow on Marty's thing, like what piece of the transformation are we in today? I think that, as Bob was noting, and Paul, you have to look at each piece of the value chain and what customers are getting, and I think that what's happening in movie theaters is awesome. There's new seats, there's bars, there's fun things to be had sort of before and after your movie-going experience to make it a night out. It is a time of rapid, I mean, just call it, call a spade a spade. There's Netflix, there's Amazon, there's other things you can do, but I think sitting at home on your couch, in your underwear with the flickering blue light, that's one experience. It's not bad. It's just very different. It's not going out with your friends and having an awesome Technicolor time in the movie theater. And so I think that's what, as an industry, honestly, we have to be better at promoting than just the content. I mean, there's going to be Star Wars, there's going to be blockbusters, but how about just the Friday night at the movies? How do we make sure that that's as resonant for today's millennials and even Gen Zs, who are really the kind of moviegoers, teenagers, even beyond millennials, if we can imagine such a thing, then and going a little bit less than their parents did, certainly. But there's still, last year, Bob and Paul probably know the numbers better than I do, but 11 billion admits at movie theaters domestically, U.S. and Canada, roughly.
11.4 billion
11.4
revenue, and it was a record.
Record, and 1 billion admits. So it becomes a market that's it's within a band, but between VR and I'll go back to the bars. And again, what we're doing is assuming the experience at the theater is great. How do we make it easier for those people to find the movies they love and connect with the people they want to go with? So I think that's a piece of it. The idea of, for a millennial, going up, standing in a line at a box office, standing in a line for concessions. That is not what people want to do anymore. It's not what you do at Starbucks in the morning, right? And so how do we bring some of that Uber, Lyft-like technology to the theatrical experience, make it easier from when you think about going to a movie to when you get to your seat? And I think that sort of frictionless commerce will help get more people back.
Do you know how often millennial checks their phone during a movie? It doesn't have, it's still a great industry, but I would think, because they could miss a lot in an hour and a half, couldn't they?
I mean, I think the average person opens his or her phone over 100 times a day. So that's, yeah, it might be good for the mind, we could argue, but I don't know if we're ever going to be able to fully stop people from.
Yeah. I digress, Marty.
No, that's okay. Part of the idea is a discussion.
To that point, there was a NATO seminar a few years ago where they had millennials, a panel of millennials, just to ask, well, what is it you love about the movie-going experience, and what do you hate about it? And of course, the answer was what they hated about it was too expensive. That people would always say that. But to the point of checking your phone in the theaters, the subject was raised. Should there be an auditorium for a movie that appeals to millennials, dedicated to people that want to text while they're watching a movie? And this particular panel of young people were horrified that they would be singled out, and they said, we absolutely don't want to be doing that in a movie theater, because we want to get away from it. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but certainly we frown upon it, and it is annoying to other people to see the distraction of the light going on.
And I think lowering the barriers to purchasing that ticket and then showing beyond that, like what are your options in the theater? Like you said, a bar, which is amazing for me particularly, before I see a movie or during the movie. And I love that millennials do respect that, theater going experience that, I think there's a misguided idea that they're just like in the, they can't be off their phones for 2 hours. It would be literally impossible for them to do that. But I think there's a respect by the younger viewer for that experience, but also, like you were saying, Matthew, about how millennials buy things now. It's not like when I was a kid and we went to the theater and paid our, what was it, $1.75 or whatever for a James Bond marathon for like 10 hours at the Fox Theater in Palos Verdes, and that's how I grew up. I didn't have a phone, obviously. So I think that combining the old school idea of going to a movie theater with the new school technology to drive millennials to the theater, I mean, that's key. We still have to have great content, obviously, but like you said, sometimes just going out to a great theater, having dinner, having wine while you're watching a movie, going out on a date, whatever it is, that can just be in and of itself, like going out to a restaurant. What do? We go outside the home. We want to go out to eat. People have to get outside the house. But again, having to admit that there's so much content now available everywhere, it's a highly charged, competitive environment.
So with the box office down domestically so far this year, the press has been ablaze, and I think that's probably a good word, ablaze with things such as the death of the cinema.
If it bleeds, it leads, right?
Are we going to how far off track are they on that, or why is the press mistaken about even saying that? So
I would suggest that the press tends to always dwell on the negative about our industry, which is, you're only eating your own. We had like the worst August in box office history, and followed by the greatest September in box office history. So content really is king. I mean, I think that we as an industry, didn't really do our job, and I'm speaking about the studios as well as exhibitors. We tend to just play all the movies, and it was just unfortunate some of these movies that we thought were going to do significantly better weren't as good as we'd hoped they would be, and the public isn't going to spend their money, on seeing something that is just not up to snuff. On the other hand, if a movie appeals to them, millennials, older people, I mean, a huge audience came out to see the movie It, which was astounding box office on that. So we're always, looking at the, it's a funny business where we're today evaluating the decisions we made six months ago about what we thought these movies were going to do while we're projecting the next 6 months out. So we're disappointed with the box office being down, as Marty suggests, but we think that we have a good shot of equaling the box office total of last year with a great November and a fantastic December ahead.
So what's going to make that happen in the next 3 months, just looking out to 12/31, or what will be some of the challenges that will possibly preclude that? And that's for anybody. Craig, do you?
Well, I think, we've got great product to the end of the year, like Bob was saying. Some big blockbuster movies that I think are going to perform pretty well. Granted, it comes down to how well they've been made. So, like Bob said, we'll look at everything on paper, and some things look really good, and then obviously don't pan out exactly as we had hoped. You look at something like Furious 8 and Guardians of the Galaxy 2, which were two highly anticipated sequels that did okay, but didn't do the expectations that people were thinking. And same thing with like Transformers. There's a franchise that's kind of on its last legs at this point. But I
Thankfully.
think, yeah, right, exactly. At some point, they gotta give it up. But but I think looking at something like Thor, which is coming up, is looking really good. That's a really highly anticipated. Justice League, and obviously Star Wars is gonna really change. When you compare the last couple weeks of 2016 with Rogue One versus Star Wars, the Star Wars Episode 8 will end up doing significantly higher, maybe 60% higher than the Rogue One did at the same time.
So putting on my finance hat, this year's box office turns into film rentals, which turns into next year's production spending. If you put the sequence there. Some of that is driven by what goes on in China and in other international territories. How long before you think China will be #1 at the box office?
Well,
Put on your speculation hat. Anybody who wants to speculate.
I read somewhere where somebody said by 2024 or something like that. I don't know how to really assess that. I mean, when you have China last year did $6.6 billion. North America did $11.4 billion. I think, though, getting back, though, to the original thing about the box office reporting and how it's reported in the news, I think by and large the trades and the journalists are looking at the facts and reporting on them, absolutely. And when the box office is down, they have to report that. When it's up, you have to report that, and that's fair. I think, though, the broader picture, though, is that I've been looking at stuff like all the people on the panel here for years, and I've seen this forever. I mean, so many times they've called it like it's the end of the movie-going experience when the box office goes down for a little bit. So, like Bob said, August was like it was a terrible August, and then suddenly in September, mostly driven by the success of It, we had a record-breaking September. Now, Blade Runner opened this past weekend. It underperformed, and so now the sky is falling again. But then when Thor Ragnarok opens, it's going to be back up. So you can't have a weak stomach in this business, but you have to acknowledge when it's up, when the box office is up, and when it's down. No question.
I always love that Mark Twain quote, which is, the news of my death is greatly exaggerated. And it seems to happen every year in the film business. And at the end of this year, it'll be interesting to see what people write, because certainly it won't be probably a very exciting story. It'll be the box office was flat from last year, or it's down 1%, or it's up 1%, but it won't be meaningful change probably. And then what will people say? It'd be like, hey, it was a pretty good year, kind of not much to say here, right?
Right.
Pulling it back into China for a second.
Yeah, can I
Go ahead.
address your China question? So I think, so obviously initially everybody was estimating 2017, and based on the trajectory, it looked like that could be possible. I think obviously what's happened in China now is we've kind of reached the level of the people who are going now are going a certain amount of times a year. You also had a lot of ticket subsidies going on, so the Chinese audiences were used to paying less for tickets, and they got accustomed to how much it cost to go to the movies. And then when those subsidies went away, suddenly going to the movies became a much more expensive proposition for them. So what I see, although the box office is up a little more than I expected it to be this year, thanks to something like Wolf Warrior, which is such a big hit over there, I still think it's 4 to 5 years away from surpassing.
Numbers I have say 61% of the revenue in China has been from what they call imports. Is it likely that 34 pictures a year will increase? There's a World Congress coming up, whether or not that's a topic, World Congress in China. Will that be a topic, do you think? Will they increase imports now that their home-based industry has grown? Anybody got an opinion?
They will. So before I was at IMAX, I was with Fox, and I worked on the MPA panel that actually was a group that talked about what we were going to ask for in 2017. And so, and since I don't work for Fox anymore, I can talk about it now. So basically, asking for more films is definitely important, but also along with that is getting rid of the blackout periods. They aren't acknowledged necessarily, but there are a lot of weeks in the year where they just don't release Hollywood titles, and so sort of increasing the amount of Hollywood titles isn't going to help us if we can't get more weekends where Hollywood titles are able to play. So the summer needs to open up. The December period. This month you have both a holiday and then the party Congress meeting as well. So, so there are probably 10 to 20 weeks a year where you really don't see any Hollywood titles being released, and for it to be effective, for you to be able to effectively release more Hollywood titles, you definitely need to be open to more of those weekends.
And an observation is we focus on frontier tech and broadly how new tools are impacting storytelling. Some of the companies that we meet with have a vision of the paradigm in storytelling is going to shift. And there's a question here about, do you believe in this shift or not? But today, a story is told between a storyteller and then the viewer or the listener. But with the tools in the future, you could have something where you kind of enter into an experience, and it could be a world. So maybe a Star Wars example is you land on Tatooine. I'm trying to think of where Luke's home is. And then you may or may not get onto a speeder and go to the bar, or you may stick around home and work on the whatever. But this kind of environment where people are kind of coming in and out of this, it's more of a choose your own adventure. And I'm curious, that obviously doesn't work in a theater setting. So would your perspective be that people really don't want to do that, it takes too much work, that it's a problem for the industry, or that it's so far down the road it's not really worth worrying about today?
Interesting comment.
I mean, yeah.
That's, you mean, so you would, rather than go to a theater, you'd have an experiential situation, like a scenario that takes you more, that immerses you more in that experience?
Yeah, this is kind of in the wicked paradigm shift. If it would be the equivalent of before the movie theater existed, people went to a theater and there was live action, and now there was just a new paradigm around.
Well, I think the
theater.
4D and that is going in that direction. I think that's where you're.
But that's related to the movie directly. I think what you're talking about
I'm talking
is
about
a separate experience.
Yeah, it's a new, best way to describe it, new paradigm.
That is really kind of what I described earlier as the Dreamscape experience, which is interactive VR, where you go into this world created by Steven Spielberg. So we're in partnership with Westfield shopping malls, as I suggested. So I think AMC is committed to having 8 over the next few years, which some of which will be actually within the mall. Others will actually be in the lobby of the theater, because we think it's an additive experience. The concept is the pieces of content will run about 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes. So before or after you see a movie, you could be having this other experience, with your friends.
See, and that's what's cool. That's going to keep people there. It's going to get them excited. They're going to stay to have a drink either before or after. You're making it a total destination, and for younger viewers for whom that may be the key, like something VR where the footprint in the theater is the same, but you have the goggles, and that opens up a whole new realm of content creation. So it's literally like putting a theme park in your goggles rather than having to use, acres and acres of real estate to do it.
And not to keep dwelling on Dreamscape, but it is interactive to the point where in the demo, they have a wand that turns into a torch, which you can light bugs with. You can toss it back and forth between you and your partner. There's a basketball thing where you're actually tossing something back and forth. So it's actively interactive.
Are you doing this like in the next to where you do concessions, or is it like in a whole different retail space in the theater, in the mall, or where would it be?
Well, I'm not sure where we're going to have it within the theaters, but we are going to have it within the theaters. I'm not sure if it's going to occupy what's a current auditorium or be in a section of one of our large lobbies. But we'll also be, within the malls that are near where the theaters are.
Cool. That sounds really exciting.
I think from a VR point of view, I want to read a couple of headlines. The Dreamscape one is a very positive headline, got a lot of really good press last week. From a consumer point of view, it may help. A consumer item that I read recently from TechCrunch: over the past several months, it's become clear that the war is no longer HTC and Oculus trying to discover who is Betamax and who is VHS. Now they're just trying to ensure that high-end VR doesn't turn out to be Laserdisc. Interesting headline. MIT Technology Review wrote, Hollywood has no idea what to do with VR. And the Wall Street Journal had a very positive comment about Dreamscape. Virtual reality installations to start arriving at AMC movie theaters next year. So will that help drive other VR content if the Dreamscape AMC relationship is good and good content comes as a result of that? Will that help drive more VR? Whether VR in theaters or VR location-based, like IMAX has their place on Fairfax and other places, will good content help drive the VR industry overall?
I think so, and I should mention that IMAX is also a partner in Dreamscape. I think any good idea begets more and better good ideas. We're really excited that Steven Spielberg is behind the content that's going to be part of this. But Disney has an interactive virtual reality system. I'm drawing a blank on what it's called.
The Void.
The Void. Thank you, Matthew. I think there's going to be more of it because it's pretty cool. So as somebody in his 60s seeing this, I was kind of blown away by it. but a group of teenage girls came and experienced it with our board a few months ago, and they were knocked out. So we're hoping that, come to the theater or the mall for that experience that will dovetail into seeing a movie as well.
And Heather, tying in VR with motion bases?
Yeah, so what we're doing is a new theater that we're opening in Hollywood at the end of this month, first part of November. I'm not sure of the exact date yet. The theater itself will be VR compatible in the entire 100-seat room. We anticipate having brands want to use it to showcase different promotional stuff and come in and use that theater as another source of revenue for that cinema. We don't really see it being a full-length feature, but we did a program for Coca-Cola for some trade shows, and we made a little 2-minute long commercial for them in VR, and everybody loved it. It wasn't too long. It was a cool little experience following a Coke bottle around, and we thought this really is sexy and it's fun, and we can see that being used inside the cinema. And the throughput, of course, is better if there's 100 seats versus the 2 or 4 that are kind of used in lobbies right now, which is, it just doesn't turn the ROI for the cinemas.
Just one
Sure.
more comment on that is that given the sort of the blockbuster and franchise nature of the business now too, VR is a way to it's a way to obviously augment that and to help people interact with their favorite characters from movies and to keep them engaged in those movies. And so really it's sort of the way to keep them engaged during the times when they don't have their movie's not been released, or it's a time between sequels or whatever. And I think that's one of the real strong points. And then to your point about the content, obviously, the content isn't exactly where obviously we want it to be yet. And so obviously we're sort of setting up the infrastructure now, but can't set up too quickly because we need the content to be there to support it. So it's definitely, I think that's one of the things that has been sort of held back the rollout of different VR centers and so forth. But I think as we get a better understanding of what we're looking to do in VR content and how how consumers want to engage with it, I think you'll start to see really high quality content, both with movie related and also non-movie related.
I think content is king, obviously, and the marketing opportunities with VR seem enormous. So in other words, if I'm going to see Blade Runner 2049, or weeks in advance of the movie's opening, there's a piece of exclusive content available on VR where I can go in the movie theater instead of, I'll still watch the trailer obviously in the theater, but if I can see a specialized piece of content that I can't get anywhere else except for a movie theater on VR, I'm there. As a film buff, I'd be all over that. You're behind the scenes with Ryan Gosling on the set or with Denis Villeneuve directing. Just something, that's the differentiation. To me, it's all about differentiating the big screen experience or the movie theater experience from the home theater or home experience. And both are great. And there's always been kind of this pit, it's always been like the small screen versus the big screen. Everyone I know who loves going out to a movie theater loves small screen content. They love going to the movies. It's just like people listen to music on vinyl. They also listen to it on MP3s, whatever medium they can find it on. If you're a film buff, you're voracious in your appetite. I think it's just about getting more creative in how to create content that will, again, differentiate that movie experience for you.
So do you think that can help drive the consumer VR product? Not what's in a theater, not what's in a location-based location, but people buying at home. I mean, today, literally this morning, Mark Zuckerberg at the Oculus VR event introduced, I think it's called Oculus Go, $199 headset. Coming down from their prior one was like $599 or $499, Gene?
Yeah, it was $599, and then they
So
lowered
is
it
the
temporarily.
$199 price point something that you see can help gain traction and do what Paul is talking about?
Unfortunately not. I'm a huge believer in VR. Left my old job in part to pursue VR, but there are some structural beyond just the cost, and it's a combination of cost and content, and people get sick. When I think about VR, and I think about that 100 person in the theater and putting the VR on, actually I physically get sick thinking of it. And the reason is that, and again, this is coming from somebody who's an evangelist for VR. So there is some motion sickness, it's the opposite of motion sickness. It's simulation sickness. But I think that all those little things need to get hammered out because there are cheap solutions out there. Daydream's really good. There's a lot of versions of higher-end versions of cardboard that are good enough. So I think that those three things need to get solved. And I'm here to predict that the industry will get past it, and 10 years from now, VR is going to be everywhere.
You know, I have time for Q&A in a little while, but you seem to be anxious on a question here, so I'll take it.
I have a comment. The motion sickness, I wrote a book on virtual reality a long time ago. The motion sickness comes from a low frame rate, crazy frame rate that goes away.
Good news. Increased frame rate, motion sickness goes away.
We'll do Q&A in a little bit. We're winding down on time, and I will leave plenty of time for that. 3D. Can't have a panel on this topic without talking 3D. So with a lot of hype, 12 years ago, putting a time frame in perspective, 12 years ago November, Disney, Dolby, and Real D brought Chicken Little to the U.S. cinema in approximately 80 theaters. Lots of hype surrounded the rollout as movie after movie had 3D screens hitting a higher per screen average than the 2D versions. As a part of that, the stats showed that 3D was capturing a significant part of the box office with particular emphasis on opening weekend. Now 3D plays in most cineplexes at just a few times per day, down dramatically. IMAX has taken a step back from being the premier 3D format. Actually, I shouldn't say that. It's still a premier 3D form. Make sure I get my lingo correctly. Just not playing as often. What happened during that time? What will get 3D resurrected again? And what can we learn from the 3D experience that's going to help in future cinema technologies? That's a multi-part question.
Well, I think
VR.
VR.
Yeah, what happened? I didn't follow 3D, but why did it blow up?
Well, going back to the advent of 3D, as an exhibitor, one of the great benefits of 3D was it accelerated the rollout of digital cinema because you had to have digital cinema in order to play 3D. And you know, when it first opened with Chicken Little, it was kind of a wow factor because it was really great 3D compared to like what we had seen in the 50s and the 60s and some of the other, you know, cheaper cardboard glasses iterations. But you know, the 3D experience really peaked with Avatar, Alice in Wonderland, and How to Train Your Dragon were like the trifecta of three great 3D experience movies in a row. And then subsequent to that, you know, the studios would do cheater 3Ds. I would confess that exhibitors probably overcharged for family 3Ds because the animated experience is usually the best in 3D. And you know, I think that we were overly aggressive as an industry. So I think people soured on that and soured on some of the content that was put out. But it did fast forward the digitization of exhibition, which has been a great thing. And I still think that, you know, given the right piece of content, the 3D experience is fantastic, as was evidenced by Gravity and The Life of Pi, and you know, some other movies. You know, if that old Transformers, you know, wasn't a great movie, we've already kind of dished on that, but it was a good 3D experience. So I think there's a future for 3D, but it needs to be the right content.
I think there's a lot of lessons for VR in that scenario where you had Avatar and you had Alice in Wonderland, and all of a sudden it was like every movie had to be in 3D. And then there was a lack of quality because a lot of them were not originally conceived or shot in 3D. They were, I forget what they called the term, but you know, converted to 3D, and that, you know, it started killing the golden goose because the quality wasn't there. Not just of necessarily the content might have been fine, but you have to remember too, people today are so used to great technologically charged experiences that look and feel great that if you go out too early with something and jump on a bandwagon before it's fully realized, I realize you got to get out there. You got to get the technology out there, and there's going to be early adopters who are going to be right, you know, they're going to be on top of that and love it, but after a while, it becomes less special if the quality systematically dips. And that's true for every piece of content, whether it be music, movies, whatever it is. If there's just too much of it and the overall perceived quality goes down, then it's not as special anymore. So that's just my
And then
take.
just on an international perspective, 3D is actually still really popular outside of North America, and actually in Canada too. I know that the Cineplex guys in Canada sometimes get 80% market share on 3D on an opening weekend. But places like China, Russia, even some of the sophisticated markets of Europe, I mean, the emerging markets, you would expect that because they are actually, a lot of their moviegoers have grown up just with 3D, because in the last 10 years, a lot of these markets have just sort of started to establish themselves. But then you have markets like Germany and Holland, where it's literally 90 to 95% 3D, partly because of how it's programmed, but also because they've gotten people accustomed to seeing movies with 3D and putting the glasses on and so forth. So I think, and then just to clarify something about IMAX's standpoint, because I think there is some confusion on this, is that what IMAX is trying to do, because IMAX started to get pigeonholed as a 3D company, and in fact, when you would ask people what IMAX is, about a third of them would say it's a 3D company. So that was something that we've actively tried to start to distance ourselves from a little bit, because as you can imagine, this weekend on Blade Runner, it was 80% 2D, 20% 3D. Had IMAX played it in 3D, it probably would have been 25%, maybe 30% 3D. But as you can imagine, if all we can get is 20 to 30% of the audience, if that's our entire group that's going to even consider watching it in IMAX, that's just, that's not enough. We're losing out that 70% that doesn't want to see it in 3D. So in a lot of cases, we're then deciding to do 2D. But then internationally, we're still playing things in 3D. And what you'll see mostly going forward is there'll be an option of 2D and 3D like there is on most films. So.
In the IMAX auditorium?
In the IMAX auditoriums, yeah.
Do you know offhand if the PLF auditoriums are going to do the same thing? Or what's going to happen?
Bob would probably know better. I know that Dolby's mostly 2D, because unless they do stuff with real D, but you...
Yeah, so currently AMC is the lone exhibitor to offer the Dolby Cinema experience. It's a different experience than Real D or IMAX 3D. So I think we have 80 deployed in the U.S. right now, 80 Dolby Cinemas. Of those, I believe we have outfitted 10 that are 3D compliant. We haven't gotten a lot of push to play movies in Dolby 3D. In fact, even as the kids' movies that we played at the advent of the Dolby Cinema experience, guests would have an option to see a movie in Dolby Cinema 2D or a regular auditorium in 3D, and they would almost always choose the Dolby Cinema piece. So I think part of the pressure on 3D might also be the advent of PLFs and Dolby Cinema as a PLF, where if you're a consumer and you're going to make a decision as to, I'm going to bring my family of 4 to see a family movie, which upcharge am I willing to pay? The 3D experience, where I might have problems with my kids with the glasses, or the Dolby experience, which we think is going to be great, with transducer seats which kind of vibrate a little bit, and laser projection and tremendous sound. So.
Do you know offhand if those consumers understand what Dolby Cinema is, or is it the brand name that brings them into making that decision?
Well, I think everybody's familiar with Dolby, as a great sound complement. I think the first movie that was in Dolby was A Star Is Born back in 1976, and prior to that, Dolby was a component of our cassettes and our tape machines and all that. So I think that IMAX is certainly the most identifiable brand, but I think Dolby's pretty recognizable as well.
All right, industry consolidation. Interesting topic. Every year there's always talk about one company or another seeking to or rumored to be considering buyout of a studio. One of the larger exhibitors or others in the value chain. Tech giants such as Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google are most often mentioned. They have the cash to do it, significant amounts of cash. Let's speculate what would happen if any one of those companies bought out, let's say, one of the studios. We already know that AT&T is maybe buying Time Warner, but what if Disney was purchased by an Apple, a long thought out rumor. What if, it doesn't matter any one specifically, I'm talking in broad generalities. If one of those big tech companies bought out a studio, how would that change the industry, if at all?
Well, that's a tough question. I think the infusion of cash that would come from that could create a lot of content because, if you have billions of dollars in cash reserves, you can hire all kinds of, talent on all levels. But I just hope if that happens that whoever's at the top loves cinema and loves movie theater, that movie theater experience. Because I think there's an idea that if that happened, that if there's more money in it to just go small screen, digital, direct to that company, where the money would flow straight in, that somehow the commitment to the cinema or movie theater experience would get sidelined. That would be a bad thing. And there's a reason, I sound like I'm preaching now, but there's a reason that the movie theater exists and why it has existed for so long. And despite the box office has its ups and downs, think of the world we're living in now. The fact that sitting in a movie theater looking at a light is basically, the same experience as it was for people in the 40s, yet it survives now. There's a lot of things. The pay telephone's pretty much gone. There's other things that are gone, but the movie theater remains. That, to me, has to be at the center of whatever entity would buy into this.
I want to comment.
That'd be a part of it.
Okay, please do.
Okay, of these companies he mentioned, the thing that they specialize in is how they market to that millennial and the centennial, which Adam Tickets also has this fabulous way of understanding. They're not marketed to the way that you and I, us older people, were marketed to. They don't listen to ads, they don't really pay attention to commercials, but they are more subculture, and these guys get it. So I think that what could possibly be a benefit is they know how to do sponsorships, they know how to do granular type of promotion that might encourage or entice that age demographic to socialize together and get back to the cinema because they're talked to in a language that they understand. His company has kind of figured it out, but they're relatively new, and I see them doing some great things with talking socially and encouraging this group that likes to get together and hang out and socialize together to go to the cinema together. So that's what I think could happen.
I want to weigh in on the Apple side of things. If Apple were to acquire a studio, or if Apple continues down the road that they're going right now, which is aggressive investment, increasing investment in original content, is if that, let's say that did happen, my immediate reaction would be they're doing it for the small screen and for their services business. It's 15% of their business today. It's growing at close to 20%. It's been a steady growth in that over the last couple of years. Investors pay them more for that per dollar for that because of the reliability around it. And so I think that would be the immediate reaction from investors over Apple making some big bet in content.
So before we get
Marty,
to...
can I just make a comment?
Go ahead.
So the idea of a major company buying studios, studios have been bought and sold a lot. Coca-Cola, bought Columbia, once upon a time before Sony bought it, and Seagram's, bought Universal, and Universal I think has had I don't know how many owners before Comcast. So that's I think when a large company acquires a film studio, it's anybody's guess as to how they're going to run it and how much they're going to understand the business. But to the Apple point, so you have Amazon, who's a gigantic company, who has come into our business and has released, some really great movies. The Big Sick is one of the best movies, I think I saw over the summer. It was a little, kind of specialized movie that was really a terrific film. So they're committed to our business. They're committed to the exhibition experience, unlike a company like.
Okay. Before we go to Q&A, we're going to do something I call Blockbuster or Not. I'm going to read through a list of movies, one by one, and by a show of hands in the audience and here too, if you wish, tell me if you think it's going to be a blockbuster or not. Basically, raise your hand if you think it's going to be a blockbuster. You can define that any way you want. It doesn't necessarily have to tie to box office, so it's your decision. First one, Goodbye, Christopher Robin. Okay. Jumanji. Star Wars Last Jedi. Okay, is there a Carrie Fisher effect on that movie or not? People want to see it because of Carrie Fisher, they just want to see Star Wars?
Yeah.
All right, sorry, Star Wars. Suburbicon?
No.
People know what that is? Okay, Tomb Raider? Few hands, okay. Justice League, he's a little mixed on that one. It's all right. Justice League? Maze Runner? The Current War? One person back there. Paddington 2? No, he was shaking his head. I'm watching a couple of people out there. The Upside? All right, Thor? Mentioned here a few times. Sounds pretty good. Murder on the Orient Express? Geostorm? Handful. Meyerowitz Stories? Couple people, all right. Tyler Perry's Boo to a Medea Halloween. Okay, handful. Thank you for your service. No. LBJ? And actually the last one on my list, and we'll go to Q&A, Ready Player One. Okay. Now let's go Q&A. This lady back here has been very patient.
Oh, Daguerreotypian, yeah. Paul's fine. I think that's an interesting point. I think what you're saying is, if you have these various what's that? Oh yeah, she was asking about the platforms fitting the content. I think that's what you were saying, and it does open a lot of possibilities. It used to always be said that, would you want to see my dinner with Andre in 3D, and and that was kind of that was the example of where. And that's an opinion. I would love to see it in 3D. Anyway, but is that a piece of content that would fit that medium, that would make sense for that technology? I think with all these new technologies coming out, it does. If you're a content creator, if you're creative, start thinking about like this. I mean, and VR is a prime example. These other, there's ways to express content and ideas that maybe haven't even been thought of yet. And I don't think any of those preclude the movie theater, right? I mean, I think people are still going to want to go to the movie theater. It's just something we do. But I love that idea of fitting the content around a new platform or technology.
Okay. Yuri?
Video games are huge. The question's about video games. Yeah. Yeah, you. In my school, which I have for cinematography, most of the people would like to be totally new cinematographer in video games. Yeah. And it's a huge business, that video game business. And if you could get to that audience where they live. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you're saying your students, they want a degree in video game development, not necessarily film production? So the gentleman was asking about video games, and the students he works with, they're more interested in developing video game content or becoming part of that industry. Is that what? Oh,
As a service?
Do you mean playing video games in movie theaters? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, I think the reason he was asking about why aren't more people going to the movies, and why are video games so incredibly popular? How do you get those people? What I would say to that is you want to get that huge audience for video games to go to the movie theater, right? And they're a really strong audience. But I don't have kids, but I have friends who have kids, and they say when their sons or daughters are playing a video game, they are right there. They're only interested in that. So maybe via VR to a technologically based audience like that, or by marketing to them where they live, letting them know about the movies, then maybe you dovetail the two technologies together.
So and I'll answer to that as well. So what we're doing is we're looking at that video game audience that likes to compete, and that industry is called esports. So we'll be launching this first hybrid esports room inside the 4D room at the Hollywood Chinese Theater. And what will happen is a couple of days a week, there'll be tournaments that will go on that will be gameplay in the foyer and also go into the room, so that those players, those tournament operators, can bring their players in, and because it is kind of addictive, they play and they compete, and they also watch online. So they can watch online and then watch the game that's going on inside the cinema. So our thought and hope is that that young audience that likes to play, that's so competitive, that imbibes a lot of content, and we hear all kinds of statistics about the amount of people that watched the Super League final championship was even more than the Super Bowl, or some craziness of viewership, that we're hoping that if we give these people this regular place to go play a couple days a week, they'll begin to come to the cinema and find this as their home, and of course then start to watch movies because they think it's great to go to the cinema.
Last question, gentleman in the blue shirt.
How, I mean, the elephant room, how do you think that may help or hurt the business, especially for the millennials? Because what you guys spoke about with millennials, none of you mentioned that millennials mostly care about shared experiences, which everybody agrees when you go to a theater, it's a shared experience, but it's not a visual shared experience, because they like to post about it or share it with their social network or their social currency. So do you think that with MoviePass and the price point here is affordable to millennials, given the cost of a movie ticket now for an average millennial is more than what they would want to spend, maybe brings that down?
Well,
You got the social experience.
we know what AMC has said about MoviePass, so I'll leave that one there. Look, I think what they have done on the good side of the scorecard is shown that there's a lot of enthusiasm around moviegoing, perhaps at a different price point, perhaps on a subscription model. I don't think there's anything proprietary about what they've done. In fact, as probably you guys know, they've been at it for 7 or so years. And $50 people weren't willing to go. At $10 people are interested in going. And so I think that it's something that you'll see probably a lot of folks in the business reacting to. It would not be surprising if there were others who came out with subscription type products, probably not at that price point. I don't think that price point is probably sustainable for the industry, and probably not for MoviePass. I would hypothesize. So I think it's one of those things where promotion gets a lot of buzz and people flock to it, and you'll probably see some changes. But I think it's great that there's a lot of people who are out there interested in going to the movies for all of us, and I think that there probably should be some experimentation on price points to attract more people in. It's sort of a supply-demand situation, right, where we have a static pricing model, and maybe some changes. Some experimentation is certainly worthy, and that this experiment is exciting people to talk about it. So that's good.
And we're out of time. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marty. Thank you.
Just a state of permit, he wants to grab a